Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. It's the beginning of the final game week of this regular season for the Nittany Lions, looking to get to 10-2, have Michigan State stumbling their way into Beaver Stadium. We'll talk about that matchup and dive in a little bit more for the details later this week with a reporter who covers the Spartans on a daily basis. We're back on a Monday, as we normally are, to break things down from the preceding matchup, which was another blowout victory for Penn State, 55-10, the final score out at Rutgers on Saturday. Penn State puts up the final 48 points of that contest. Daniel Gallen joined us from Piscataway for a post-game podcast on Saturday evening. Hopefully you caught that one. Some instant reactions to another really impressive and dominant victory for Penn State in conference play against an inferior opponent. As usual, we bring back in Daniel and Mark Brennan, fresh off their visit to the Garden State, for a conversation here on a Monday. A little bit later here on the episode, we'll talk recruiting. Penn State has a class departure to get to. Ajani Shakir, a wide receiver, no longer a member of this group. Tyler Calvaruso will break down that, take a look at what comes next, and dive into some other things. We're now about a month away from signing day. But, fellas, let's get back to it. Penn State picks up win number 9 on the season. It's a 3-0 November thus far, Mark Brennan, and they continue to put teams away and handle their business in matchups where we wondered, could the momentum fade over the course of these games? Instead, it seems to be building over the course of these matchups.
Yeah, Tyler, one thing, your alma mater, could you get them to invest in something other than 28K dial-up modem access in the press box? It's, we're in the 2020s here. I mean, come on, Rutgers. What are you doing? That was ridiculous. But I'm sorry I had to go off on that rant. But it was very, very frustrating for people trying to cover the game from the press box. And, it's something they really ought to look at. If you want to be a Big Ten program, act like you have the internet access for people to actually cover you. But, the thing that jumped out to me in that game, and I mentioned this in my wrap up, is, you have complementary football where, the defense sets up the offense, or the offense makes a big play and puts the defense in a good position, or the special teams. This was complementary to a whole different level. This was the defense actually scoring touchdowns. This was special teams actually scoring touchdowns when the offense was scuffling. And I thought that was a really, really good sign, because that in the past couple of years, those kind of games stayed way too tight for Penn State, way too long. And in some of them, not necessarily against Rutgers, but they've lost games like that where the offense hasn't played well early. And to have those two other areas just really step it up and allow for the offense to come along. And I think a lot of it was tied not so much to Sean Clifford, but to that patchwork offensive line. And when it finally got its stuff together with an assist from two fantastic young running backs, then it started rolling. And one thing that James Franklin said after the game that really jumped out at me, he called the Allen and Singleton erasers. And that's not erasing the opponent. That's erasing mistakes that the offensive line was making at different times. And that's huge, because in recent years, maybe since Journey Brown, they haven't had that player. The offensive line has had to play perfectly. And even then, the backs weren't quite good enough to do what these guys are doing now. And, I'm going to invoke the name of Saquon, but Saquon was playing with an even worse line, and he was the ultimate eraser. So I don't think these guys are in his league in terms of that. But I think that's the ultimate compliment from a coach when he's talking about these young players who are making life easier for an offensive line that's really in a tough spot. And that goes back to what I started with, the whole aspect of complementary football. You could have it between offense, defense, and special teams, and you could have it between different areas of the offense where one area may be struggling and another area is going to help you pick it up. And that's what happened on Saturday.
His usage of that term eraser has stood out. He's done it a few times in talking about these running backs. It's usually something that we hear more tagged to a linebacker or a safety because of what they clean up at the back end of the defense. But here we are again, Daniel, the last 10 games, 50% of the time, a Penn State running back ends up as the freshman offensive player of the week. I guess freshman of the week here in the conference. And this time it's Katron Allen who takes the bow. His partner here has a 100-yard kickoff return. Oh, by the way, on the day, and averages over 6 yards per carry. But it's Allen who goes over 100 yards, gets into the end zone, and ultimately comes away with his second conference honor of the season. These guys, again, sharing five of them in the last 10 weeks.
It's pretty impressive, and I think that it shows the full capability of those two players that week after week they're recognized. And Katron Allen didn't even win Freshman of the Week for the game that he scored 3 touchdowns in. So there could be 6 out of 10. I think that when you're talking about freshmen making that leap up to college football, a big thing that comes up in conversation a lot is the consistency, the ability to week in and week out hold up to the rigors of the college game. Um, there's some talk with Jalen Sider earlier this month, with James Franklin a little bit more recently. The classic, are you worried about them hitting the freshman wall question? And everyone has said that just kind of no, based on how these guys have prepared and how they've looked early. But I think that when you look at these freshman of the week honors, it just shows that they've showed up week after week. Sometimes it's like Singleton went over 100 yards last week for the first time since the Auburn game. Allen went over 100 yards this weekend for the first time since the Central Michigan game. It feels like they've really been playing off of each other. It the hot hand almost doesn't even really feel like it applies because I feel like every week they're both playing pretty well. Um, I think that you could also make the case that this weekend we saw some uncharacteristic runs from Katron Allen where he was stopped behind the line a little bit more than we'd seen through the first 9 weeks of the season or 10 weeks of the season. So big testament to those guys. I mean, I might say that they've been beyond as advertised coming into this year based on the workload that they've had to take and how both of them have been centerpieces. I think Allen has 135 carries. Singleton has 132. Depending on how this finale against a bad Michigan State defense and then a bowl game goes, I think both of them are in striking distance of 1,000 yards. It might be you might need a Cotton Bowl type performance to get there, but it is really, really impressive to see that from these two players.
You could get two freshman running backs over 1,000 yards this season. You're right. It is realistic based on the way these guys are playing, the way this offensive line is performing. And we'll see what the opposing matchup looks like beyond this Saturday. But you could do that without taxing either of these guys. I mean, I think they had 20 plus carries in a sloppy matchup against Central Michigan that day when everyone was fumbling the football all over the place. And by the way, Nick Singleton's going to have that log to his memory, and Jalen Sider will be reminding him about that this week. The fumble that was lost and set Rutgers up in Penn State territory on Saturday. But I mean, there's things like that you can point to. But overall, the ability to get these guys to where they're at without asking either of them to be some kind of a bell cow is really impressive, because you're making sure that both of them are able to kind of ease their way into situations. They don't have to take on every setting as the guy. They can shoulder that load, whether it's a 2-minute setting late in the game or whether it's a guy who's being tasked with trying to put the game away. I just love the ability for both these guys to get that chance. And Penn State has kind of said, look, you're the starter this week. Katron, you'll be up in the third series, then you get your opportunity. And they were playing pretty late into that Rutgers matchup. We know that there's not a lot of bodies in the running back room, but still, they actually took their lightest load since that Michigan loss. So it's not like they're going down the series and all of a sudden you're asking them to carry the ball 18 to 25 times a game. They've really consistently, Mark, fallen in that 10 to 16 touches, maximizing those opportunities. Now you see Nick Singleton doing it on special teams. And to me, that's the perfect recipe, especially it's one that you can package, bundle up, and go sell on the recruiting trail and say, come play early. We're not going to ask you to do everything, but if you're ready, you'll have those opportunities.
Yeah, I think Jalen Sider's done an unbelievable job of balancing that, because that can't be an easy thing. And I would encourage anybody, if you haven't done it, we have a video as we record this. It's on the front page of our site, very easy to get to, with Sean Clifford talking about both of these freshman running backs. And the one thing he said was that when they're on the sideline, both of those guys are pretty much demanding the ball, and not in a bad way. You know, they are being, it's like, give me the ball. I want the ball. I want to go out there and do things. And I just pulled it up on Otter here, and this really stood out to me from that, where Sean Clifford said, I think that's the kind of thing, my 2 cents on those two. It's been a while since we've had that kind of energy. Whoa. I mean, what is that? Did that jump out to you guys? I mean, it's been a while since we've had that kind of energy. I assume he's talking about from the running backs, but that's like, I mean, I had to go back and kind of look at that, and I was thinking, this is a sixth-year guy who got here when Saquon was here, and obviously played with Journey Brown when he was doing well before the medical issue. But for him to say it's been a while since we've had that kind of energy, at first that seemed like a kind of a throw in line. But as I watched that a second time, that's telling me that these are the guys who are not just physically able to get it done at a young age, but they're wired the right way mentally. And I think that comes down to the way they were coached when they were young. And I think that comes down to the way they've been coached since they've got here. And it is not easy. That's why I'm high on Jaywan Sider this year, because number one, he convinced those guys to come into a loaded running back room. And now all of a sudden it's not loaded. And in part because he's like, listen, I'm going to play the best backs. And if other people don't like it, that's that. And the fact that it's worked out the way that it has, knock on wood that both of these guys stay healthy, I think the message that sends out to other running backs on the recruiting trail, that if you're going to come in here, they're going to play the best backs and you're going to get coached up. I mean, I just think all of those things just tie in really well with what they've been able to do. And that quote from Clifford, it's been a while. I mean, that tells you a lot about the last two seasons. That tells me a lot. I don't know if it tells you a lot, like you guys or people watching the pod or listening to the pod. I don't know if it says a lot to them, but it says a hell of a lot to me.
It's hard to.
I was going to say, I think those Clifford comments kind of speak to the value of having a running game that you can lean on, and a running game that is picking up consistent yards, and that it just kind of builds up some momentum behind you. And those guys, and that those guys are going to break off big runs. It doesn't have to be a 59-yarder every time like Kaytron Allen had, but those guys are consistently into the secondary. And I think that it provides something that you can really feed off of, and that the whole team can kind of look at and, say like, okay, like this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. Because if you do look at the past couple of years and the things that could create energy last year, it was pretty much just Jahan Dotson. I can't really speak for 2020, but there wasn't much to really feed off of for players too. And I think that when you see Kaytron Allen get into the secondary, run over a safety, get a first down, I think that that's something that is really contagious. When you see Nick Singleton, running through contact to do it, what they talk about, turning 3 yards into 6 yards, 7 yards into 11 yards. I think that that's something that not necessarily sends a message to the team, but I think it's something that guys notice. And I think that, when you're watching your offense march down the field, I think that as a defense, that gives you confidence. As an offense, you're gaining confidence as that's going on. And I think that's something that's really infectious throughout the roster.
You're talking about the production and also there's some psychological aspect that Mark is touching on when those two things combine. And I think it's worth noting, going back to that 2020 team, they had a guy like that in Pat Freiermuth, an alpha type personality. He was lost early in the season. It was a wrecked kind of season. Sean Clifford. And I think at that point, especially, Jahan Dotson still working to really find himself as a leader, a silent leader. But it was a guy out there on the field who was one of those alpha personalities at that stage of his career? I don't know. I think that's a good question. I think that really developed as Jahan made big plays and really got his groove going in the last 20 games of his college career. KJ Hamler certainly had that. Journey Brown started to develop it, but it was such a fleeting glimpse at Journey Brown. And then you go back to a guy like Miles Sanders, Saquon Barkley, who did have that aggressive nature and wanted to be with the ball in their hands in a key moment and made sure everybody was well aware of that. And if you have those emerging personalities on this team, and it sounds like they have that at the running back position, it seems like they have some of that emerging, I guess you could call it, demeanor, identity on the offensive line that has not been there in terms of that alpha assertiveness. To me, there's a lot more of those guys you can point to on the defensive side of the football right now, the young emerging players there. But to hear it on the offensive side of the football, especially when, I'll say this, Sean Clifford is going to leave a void in at least in the terms of a guy who's going to step up and say something, and guy who's going to make things, if it's uncomfortable moment, he'll still have to step to say it. That's an area with Drew Aller we don't quite know yet, and that's he's going to have to grow in. So the more of those kind of personalities you have, and the way that it sounds like Sean's describing those young running backs and what they can mean in the huddle, what they can mean on the sideline, that's great, because you're starting to build in a support structure for your new young quarterback who immediately is going to have to be your new young leader in Drew Aller come spring 2023 when they get on that practice field.
Yeah, and I think when Sean Clifford was talking, I don't think he meant that necessarily about all different positions on offense. I think he meant it about running back in particular, because, listen, it's great to have a dominant personality and a great leader like Pat Freiermuth at tight end, and it's great to have not necessarily a dominant personality, but I thought Jahan Dotson was a great leader too. Came out after losses, wins, didn't care, was always a stand-up guy. But it's different to have it into somebody who's might be getting the ball 25 times a game, or with these two guys between them getting it 30 to 35 times per game. So I think that's a little bit, it's a little bit different to have her coming from the running backs. And the other thing that I pointed to is that in each of the last two games, you had soul-crushing runs by either of these running backs. And against Maryland, it was Singleton carrying a defender into the end zone. And then against Rutgers, Katron has the long run, 53, 59 yards, whatever it was. And they get down to the 8-yard line and they hand him the ball. And as Daniel mentioned, he runs into a safety and the tight end comes over, the offensive lineman comes over, and it's a big mass that just goes the final 5 yards into the end zone, and Rutgers wanted no part of it. And those are the kind of plays where you're like, whoa, these guys, I think that's what Sean was getting at, is that, so you have the running back who's like that, now all of a sudden, you have Brenton Strange jumping in there, or you have, I forget who the offensive lineman was, but you have it was Drew Shelton, I think, a young offensive lineman. You have that. Okay. Now as a team, we're imposing our will. I'm getting in on this too. And the whole mass went in for a touchdown. I thought that was his most impressive run in that game, not the 50-plus yarder.
That kind of bully ball is few and far between with this offense. And I think that people have been clamoring for it. And that's really become the identity. It's Sean Clifford, kind of steering the rudder, turnover-free football lately, as they've had some success here in the Big Ten play, and getting the ball into the hands of playmakers. And a lot of that is just handing the ball off and getting to these running backs and the offensive line. We saw a huge, this was a situation where it was the same group of guys essentially the whole game. We don't see that ever. And it was a 55-10 win. I think it says a lot about James Franklin wanting to protect Drew Aller deep into this game. And it certainly says a lot about them wanting to juggle some injury issues, which we already know about. Caden Wallace didn't play again. Olu Fashion, who didn't travel, and wanting to preserve some red shirts. And they've got themselves in a spot now. Vega Ioane didn't play against Rutgers, nor did JB Nelson. They can pick and choose when those guys play. Vega Ioane, he can go 2 for 2 the rest of the way now, and he's still got redshirt status. So I'm not sure how they were able to do it. I know it was very dicey. They didn't even turn to some of the walk-ons in this case, as Drew Aller was getting 30 snaps over the course of this game. They kept their starters in during a blowout victory on the road for a reason, but they survived it. And I got to give them a tip of the cap here. They didn't just survive; they thrived. They had some moments of doubt creeping in early in this matchup on the offensive front that we didn't see against Maryland, that we didn't see against Indiana. And you thought, all right, is this story kind of going to go off the rails? They righted that ship. They were able to get through it with the same 5 guys. Jimmy Chris got involved late at right tackle, but they come out of this game, as far as we understand it, intact from a health standpoint on the offensive front, and in a really good spot to do some things personnel-wise in this final matchup, and then with a month to work with on a bowl schedule. Of course, Drew Shelton, say goodbye to that red shirt, and as James Franklin said, Daniel, a worthwhile burn for the offensive tackle.
Definitely. I think that, we were all watching, for that first snap, who was going to run out there at left tackle, and it was indeed Drew Shelton. He had some struggles with Aaron Lewis, the Rutgers defensive lineman, who seemed to be able to get some pressure early on, be around the ball a lot. But I think that James Franklin framing it as a worthwhile burned red shirt, I think that kind of emphasizes how they how they've come to view Drew Shelton and his development and what he's capable of doing. There are certain times where a red shirt gets burned, and it's just a matter of circumstance where there's too many injuries, a couple things happen, and you kind of have to do it. I think that Drew Shelton's playing kind of started out maybe like that, like it's the circumstances, but I think that he has earned it, basically, that he's earned his spot to go out there and start. I mean, if it wasn't worthwhile to burn his red shirt, I don't think they'd be starting him right now. So I think it's a big testament to him. And it definitely bodes well, I think, for the future of this line and, just Drew Shelton's individual ability.
Mark, when you sat down in early August and started jotting down some of those early feedback notes from conversations about where Penn State was progressing in the preseason, one thing you noted was they felt like Drew Shelton could put himself in a position where they could use him like this if they needed to. They didn't want to have to do it this way, but there he was. They used him, and it worked out well for them. The other thing you talked about early on was Manny Diaz's potential impact in forcing turnovers, creating plays. We saw 2 defensive touchdowns on a day where there were 3 non-offensive touchdowns, the first time this century that has happened for Penn State. 3 consecutive games now, taking care of inferior opponents like you'd hope, under 200 total yards for this Penn State defense. All 3 phases getting it done, and they're using a ton of guys along the way. What can you say about what Manny Diaz has done, especially coming out of that Ohio State matchup where his group, you'd understand if the wind was out of their sails after that fourth quarter?
Yeah, I mean, the buy-in to his philosophy of creating turnovers has just been tremendous. And, we get a 15-minute, if that, window into practice every week. And I can tell you that in that 15 minutes, they are always working on creating turnovers. So I could only imagine how that projects out over the rest of the week. And they work on it in some of the most bizarre ways. I mean, one week they were throwing the ball off the wall,
yep,
just so it would take bizarre bounces and having guys catch it. And last week they were doing a thing where one linebacker would tip the ball and the other was behind trying to catch it. And it was to the point where Tyler Elston kept messing it up. And Franklin finally said, Elston, can you not tip the ball? Can't you look what's going on? And Charlie Katcher stepped up and did it once. But it's, my point being, this isn't just lip service. They work on falling on the ball. They work on tipping it, like all these different things.
Mark, my favorite is the fumble recovery drill where Diaz has 3 balls placed out, yells out a math equation, and the guys have to do the math in their head from the point of the snap to when they pick up the football, because that number that results from the equation is one of those 3 footballs, and they got to do that on the fly. And we've been seeing these things since August, and you wonder how this is going to add up. And hey, the numbers are speaking for themselves.
And first of all, I was completely confused by that. I mean, because, being a journalist, numbers are not what we do. But then you get to the game and you see Kobe King like nothing, just picking up that ball and scoring. And there it is. And then you see Jair Brown. I love the way he picked the thing up and was carrying it like a loaf of bread. Does anybody actually carry a loaf of bread like that, by the way? But it seems like a natural thing when they're doing it, right? It doesn't seem there's like no panic. And I think that goes back to all those goofy, and I mean goofy in a good way, things that we're seeing at practice all the time. So, yeah, the buy-in has been great. And I think Manny Diaz deserves all the praise that he's getting.
Man, Manny Diaz has himself under consideration for some awards. He has certainly there's a lot of things you can do in college football coaching when you get fired from a high-profile job. One of them is Netflix and chill for a year if you choose to do that. One of which is to reinvest in yourself. And Diaz told us way back in, January, that he wanted to get back to falling in love with a linebacker room, to falling in love with the defense, to being with those guys on a daily basis. And he's had a smile on his face just about every time we've seen him on the football field. And there's for great reason at this point with what he's doing with a deep arsenal on the defensive side of the football. Let's talk about the linebackers really quick, because when they have Abdul Carter and Curtis Jacobs on the field together, something that unfortunately we haven't seen a lot of late, but we got to see it a lot against Rutgers. That's something special. There's something clicking there. Kobe King is coming along. Still Tyler Elston's show, and I think we saw that reflected in the snap distribution against Rutgers. But regardless of what else is happening at linebacker, and Curtis Jacobs is going to have a choice to make here as the year 3 guy, those 2 guys are in place for you, and they're centerpiece for your defense, Daniel. There is a lot of explosiveness you can work off of.
it's two of your best playmakers that you have at that second level. I mean, it's almost like we're running out of things to say about Abdul Carter. It's game after game, it's kind of like, what can you say about him? How he's come along, and thankfully James Franklin keeps giving us
I think the TV
answers.
broadcast called him a future multi All American. I mean, they were running out of things to say on the broadcast too, so they were going all in.
But when you have Carter and Jacobs there, I mean, Jacobs is a former 5-star talent, a very well-regarded recruit. You have guys that can do a lot of different things. I think that Curtis Jacobs has shown that he really has a good ability to play in space in that Sam position. And then when you look at what Abdul Carter has done at that will position, there's still, if you're watching him play after play, there's times when he's back in coverage, where he looks a little bit like a freshman. I think the one play that stands out is that it was a long time ago at this point, but in that Northwestern game, he got caught out there in the secondary on a long play. But when both of those guys are going vertical, it is really, really impressive. I mean, Curtis Jacobs' sack of Gavin Wimsatt was, I think, one of the fastest sacks that I've seen in person. Like, he was there immediately, and Rutgers just didn't have an answer. And then you talk about all the times that you see Abdul Carter closing on a quarterback who is just kind of leisurely, running it out, looking downfield, and then looks over and Abdul Carter's bearing down, so he's got to throw it away. I think that seeing Manny Diaz be really aggressive specifically with these two players, I think has really changed the complexion a little bit of this defense, because if you recall, like last year when there were more than 4 defensive backs on the field, that normally meant Curtis Jacobs wasn't on the field. This year you've got Carter and Jacobs lined up in that prowler package behind the 3 defensive linemen, and I just think that Manny Diaz has been able to adjust, and he's been able to be creative to get all of these guys onto the field and just be able to utilize their playmaking ability. And I think that that's the biggest testament to him as a coach this year. I think he's done a great job with the mindset. I think we talked about it a lot where, last year the defense always seemed to be giving the offense a chance. Like, the defense wasn't really the issue last year, but this year's defense in that Michigan game, they score a touchdown when the offense wasn't doing anything. Against Rutgers, you get 2 touchdowns when the offense was shaky early. And I think that's kind of the next step for this defense, for the program even. And I think a lot of that goes back to Manny Diaz, to adjusting to getting guys like Carter and Jacobs on the field together in spots where they can just make things happen.
No Joey Porter on the field again. We'll stay tuned on an update for him, recovering from appendicitis. He's missed the last couple of matchups. Last note on Abdul Carter here, second on the team in tackles for loss with 7.5, leads the team in sacks at this point. He also is second on the team with 5 quarterback hurries, making his All-American kind of candidacy in the freshman category, like those running backs, and a lot of firepower in this freshman class, as we said, 10 burn red shirts. Going to dive into recruiting in just a second, but fellas, before we let you go, you've done fantastic work with the basketball coverage through 6 games. The team is 5-1. Mark, they come out of that Charleston Classic with a 2-1 record in that tournament, finished 3rd. What do you learn about the team from that experience before we get into recruiting here with TC?
Yeah, I learned it has some fight in it. I mean, fell behind kind of big against Virginia Tech and scrapped its way back. And I thought that bodes really well for them, even though they weren't able to pull out that win. And I just think the level of competition at that tournament, okay, it's not the Maui Classic. It's not one of the elite tournaments, but they played enough good opponents in that, you look at the Ken Palm rankings now. The net rankings obviously aren't out yet. But if you look at where those teams are ranked in Ken Palm, there are a bunch of representative teams. They played all decent teams, if not better than that. I mean, Virginia Tech is a top 30 team. So you play those games and come out of it with 2 wins and a loss, show some resiliency. In the final game, I wasn't able to watch it. We were taping a TV show, but to listen to it going down, and then on the way back from doing the TV show, getting some of the other freshman players besides Kevin in there and getting them some quality minutes, I think that helps them build depth. And just to go through that playing 3 games in 4 days and being generally successful, I think is a net positive for this team looking ahead.
Daniel, you followed the game Sunday, which they did win over Colorado State. Your overarching, I guess, takeaway from that 3-game swing?
I thought that they closed it on a really good note. In the Furman game to open things, you had the big first half, then things got a little bit dicey in the second half. In that Virginia Tech game, you fall behind early, you work your way back and have a chance to win at the end. But against Colorado State, you go up 13-0 early. And I think Colorado State only got within 9, or maybe it was 6 in the first half and 9 in the second half. The fact that they were able to keep them at arm's length after having kind of a roller coaster first 2 games of the tournament, even going back to last Monday against Butler, that was another game where they got up early and then kind of had to sweat it out down the stretch. So I think to see that kind of complete performance, getting guys like Evan Mahaffey and Kanye Clary meaningful minutes, 2 of the freshmen, I think was big. But I think overall, just kind of being able to just win a game, not necessarily comfortably, but just to maintain a lead, do what you need to do, never let it get dicey. I think that's kind of the next step on top of that being their 4th game in 7 days.
Yeah, one quick thing, Tyler. They moved up to 31 in Ken Palm, so you go 2-1, and I guess when I was talking about the level of competition that you were playing, that speaks to that, because if you go 2 and you could have gone 3-0 against completely terrible competition, and you're probably going to go down. So to actually climb, I think 6 or 8 or however many places it was in Ken Palm. And again, Ken Palm's not the be all end all, but until the net rankings come out, it's a very good way to rank where teams really are.
The basketball team is 5-1. The football team is 9-2. You can follow coverage of both at Lions247.com. Mark, Daniel, appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon. We got a James Franklin press conference to get to, some practice to get to this week. Interesting game week with Thanksgiving, but it is our final one of this Big Ten season. Talk to you guys soon.
Yep.
Thanks, Tyler.
All right. Let's get into it right now with recruiting, and that means it's time to get into it with Tyler Calvaruso. Appreciate those guys. And Tyler, we wanted to get to you on this Monday because there is some news to get to coming out of Sunday evening in the 2023 recruiting cycle, which is certainly down to that final stretch now. The early signing period just a few weeks away. February signing day still looms as well. But down a commitment in this class, it's one that we've been internally forecasting for some time at Lions247.com and goes to public here on a Sunday evening into a Monday morning as people react.
Yeah, never a dull moment on the recruiting trail, right? So, yeah, Penn State is now without Ijani Shakir in its 2023 recruiting class. The 4-star wideout backed off his commitment to the Nittany Lions late Sunday night. So he's back on the market searching for a new home. And as you just alluded to, this really doesn't come as much of a surprise. At the end of the day, business is business. Shakir searching for a new home. Penn State's continuing its pursuit of talent at the wide receiver position in the 2023 class. So there's a lot of movement at this time of year. In Penn State's case, it happened with Shakir on Sunday night.
Now, the anticipation with Shakir, just to kind of clarify that business is business thing, is that now he's not going to be diving right into another Power 5 commitment.
Yeah. That's how it projects right now. Yes.
So moving forward for Penn State, and they've got some holes to fill here, and they're going to be looking for upgrades at wide receiver. They've got a group here that has 5 freshmen at least in it now with Christian Driver moving from cornerback. Only one of those guys has burned red shirt. So it's going to be a very young receiver room in a lot of ways in 2023. Everyone, of course, now wants to know, well, who's going to join them in that group? And who are the names that at least you think need to be listed on this Monday coming out of this development?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation to have at this point in the cycle, given where Penn State's 2023 wide receiver board really is. So the name that we've talked about plenty throughout this cycle is Edwin Joseph from Chaminade Madonna down in Florida. He took his official visit in September. All went well there. He's since been to Auburn, South Carolina, and Louisville for officials, but Penn State is still pretty high on his list. Joseph is a guy, he has fans on the staff for sure. Miami's still in the picture there, but Penn State's in a pretty good spot. He likes the Nittany Lions. We're going to have to see what transpires there in the coming weeks. Zion Fowler is a name to know. He's one we haven't really talked about a lot. He had been committed to Pittsburgh since the summer, decided to back off his commitment to the Panthers, and he's been receiving a lot of new Power 5 interest since hitting the market, Penn State included. He's from St. Peter's Prep in New Jersey, so you're going to have to see how that one goes, but Penn State's kicking the tires there. We're going to see how deep they decide to dip their toe into that pool. So he's a name to know, a new name to know moving forward. And then kind of just to rehash some names from the past, Carmelo English is a guy we've talked about a little bit. I don't think Penn State's going to be his landing spot as things are right now. Micah Mays, the Wake Forest commit from Florida, 4-star, has really helped himself with a really good senior year. He's looking like an elite prospect at this point. I'm not sure he really circles back to Penn State. Remember, he had the chance to visit for Lash Bash in late July. That trip wound up not happening. He lands in Wake Forest class. If he's going to move off the Demon Deacons, it seems like it's more likely that that's for a Southern program or even Florida State in the ACC. So there's a lot of movement right now. I know there's a lot of evaluating going on. It's never too late to find talent. Early signing period is creeping up, but still plenty of time for Stubbs and the staff to get after it. And if I'm a Penn State fan right now, what I'm keeping an eye on is more than anything else, probably the transfer portal. It's looking like this is going to be a year where a lot of good wide receiver talent hits the portal, and I'd expect Penn State to be active there because the fact of the matter is there is a lot for James Franklin and this staff to sell to receivers who hit the portal. You got a good young quarterback in Drew Aller ready to step in. He's your foundation. You got a good running back room with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen leading the way. So there are pieces on the offense already. You're not stepping into a unit that is trying to find its identity. You're not stepping into a group that is, trying to turn a new page after a rough season. That's not the case. Any receiver that comes to Penn State is going to have a chance to step in and contribute in an offense that looks like it's going to be pretty good next season. So I'd expect the Nittany Lions to, do some searching in the portal, find the right fit. And I think that's where the staff is going to be active. If I'm a Penn State fan, that's the activity I'm keeping a really close eye on right now as the portal season starts to heat up.
Especially in terms of an instant impact. You look at Carmelo Taylor, who's on board. It's a 4-star guy. He's a new addition to the top 24/7 rankings. But he's an ascending prospect. We talked about that. Exactly. A track guy who's really figuring out himself on the football field. It certainly smells like a whole lot of red shirt to me, looking at what happens when you look at who's going to come in, make an impact. Again, you got to figure out what you have in this current freshman class, and someone's got to rise. A few guys got to step up. But I'm with you. The transfer portal, the one thing that they can't sell that they could sell in the last couple of years, especially this past offseason, is replace these monster numbers or help us replace these monster numbers. No one put up those kind of gaudy statistics that they got at Jahan Dotson. They're not going to be able to sell that, but they can certainly sell. We clearly have some shoes to fill. We have some missing pieces here. You can be that guy. And Mitchell Tinsley, he hasn't duplicated. No one expected him to do what he did at Western Kentucky in the most prolific passing attack of the 2021 college football season, but he's been reliable. I think he's at 50-plus receiving yards in 6 of 8 Big Ten games this year. And you think about if you remove him from the equation and you had to rely on just homegrown talent this year at receiver, where would you be offensively? I don't think they're going to go that route again. I think they're going to look to find another, might not be a Mitchell Tinsley, someone coming up from a different level. It might be someone that they have already previously recruited as a blue chip prospect who has spent some time on a Power 5 campus. Tinsley's a great story making that jump up from the FBS, but I think Penn State would certainly love to pluck someone who already has that Power 5 experience, has already proven what they can do in a conference like the Big Ten. And receiver's a spot where if you put yourself in that transfer portal and you play that free agency game, you can elevate your stock in a big way if you find the right program and the right quarterback compared to what you might be leaving. Let's look really quickly at the 2023 class because there was an interesting international visitor that just came through. It's the time of year whenever we hear about 2023 guys stopping by, you got to note it. And certainly when he makes the trip overseas and it's part of that plan. Can you dive into this one for us?
Yeah, if he's listening and he listens to me pronounce his name, I'm sorry in advance. Faraj Tidikpina from Germany, defensive lineman, came over for an unofficial on Sunday and really got a great idea of how Penn State kind of does things on a daily basis. That was his biggest takeaway from the trip. He got to sit in on meetings. He got a good look at practice, got a tour of the facilities. But at the end of the day, when he left Happy Valley, he was really impressed with the way Penn State, they prepare and the way they kind of break things down. Because he had kind of a unique insight in the sense that he got on campus the day after a game. So we saw a little bit of a less intense practice, obviously. The day after a game, you're not really getting after it that hard. But he took in their meetings and the way they broke down some of that Rutgers tape and, the way they use data to kind of build for the next week and progress and just get ready for their next opponent. That was something that really stood out to him. And he's part of the PPI program that does a really good job with international recruits. And Penn State has dipped into that pool before. So there's a lot to like here, I would say. Some of our guys at 24/7 have seen him in person. Cooper Patagno went overseas to see him, and he really liked what he saw. So I think this is a name to know for sure. No offer right now, and, it remains to be seen if that will come to fruition. But they got him on campus, and he liked what he saw. So
what are your thoughts here just before we let you go? I know it's a short segment, but we wanted to get you on to handle some breaking news. Just generally, 4 weeks away, What are you tightly observing? What are you engaged with the most on the message boards right now when it comes to this 2023 class?
I think really we're just kind of zoning in on the little bit, not nitpicking where Penn State needs to add, but really zoned in on what positions they're targeting right now to add before the early signing period arrives. We got running back. Cam Wallace made his way to campus for that official. We've touched on that plenty. It looks like there's going to be another running back in this class. Is that going to be Wallace? We'll see. There are a lot of guys on the board who are still out there, and Penn State is going after. Receiver now is something we're keeping an eye on and something we're really going to be updating on a daily basis at this point because they're looking for a new guy, and that's been the case for a while. Defensive line recruiting the secondary, just really there's a lot going on in all three stages defensively. So, we got a lot going on for the end of the cycle, man. It's going to be a really fun time just to keep track of everything that's going on with this program because there's a lot of activity and there's still plenty of spots to fill. And then once portal season starts real soon, we're going to be getting after it with that too.
Well, folks will be hearing from you more often on this podcast as we start to adjust out of our regular season format into that pre-signing day and a full-on mayhem when it comes to roster coverage that we got in the next month or so here on the podcast. But every single day you're at Lions247.com, our VIP subscribers enjoying that intel you providing from the recruiting trail, basketball, and, of course, football. Tyler, we appreciate it. A little bit of news to handle here. You never know when it's going to pop up, so we appreciate it, man. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon, man.
All right, big thanks to my Lions 24/7 colleagues and Daniel, Mark, and Tyler Calvaruso today, getting it done on a Monday. Thanksgiving structure here, how it's going to work with this week. We're back with another episode before the holiday. We're going to pack a lot into it, tell you what we heard coming out of James Franklin's press conference, give you our preview for this matchup against Michigan State, and bring in on a Spartans beat reporter to break down the opposing perspective here. And then we're back on Saturday with a post-game podcast from game number 12. So that's just a look ahead here. Hopefully you all are putting together nice holiday plans for yourselves and with your families. We'll talk to you real soon on the next episode. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast. I'm Tyler Donahue. Thanks as always for listening.